Here we are, almost exactly on the equator in the East African savanna. Welcome to Kenya for episode 5 of the Country and Setup Guides. This one is difficult. Difficult to drive and also difficult to set up. You will find the most grueling, most rough gravel surface and undulations here. I have picked the 98 Impreza, as I did not want to do all the guides just with the current 3 WRC cars. And I found the Impreza in Kenya is a somewhat iconic sight. Although I almost regretted it, as it turns out I found the Subaru to be very difficult to drive quickly here, as the low front bumper tends to clip things, even on maximum ride height. But I took it as a challenge to show you how you can set up even those cars that are not at home for a certain location. Side note here, please excuse all the screen tearing effects. Since the last patch it got very bad on PS5, especially in the replays. It is better while driving, but still noticeable. Tried waiting for a patch, but now I am in video making mood, so whatever. Thankfully, such a guide is more for the explanation than the immersive visuals. Anyway, moving on. As a proving ground, I will recommend the stage Kanyava. It has the longest straight right at the beginning and contains many potholes, bumps, edges and water crossings. It might miss some of the roughest gravel, but anything managing this stage usually is fine for all the other canyon stages as well. But to be sure, I recommend a stress test once you are done with your setup. Create your own quick play rally in Kenya with all different stages and a service park every stage. Go rather slowly and careful. It is not for hunting times. Try to check every service park how much damage has been gained, but do not repair it. This will give you an indication of how resistant your setup is, because it should withstand several stages without breaking the car just by driving it. If damage gains too quickly, especially for suspension, steering or radiator, you need to go back to the setup and make it more resistant. Even if it drives slightly worse, it is better if it gets through a whole rally. Now to finally get into the nitty-gritty setup details. Since we covered it in the last 4 episodes already, I will not explain why certain settings have certain effects. Instead, only which effects I wanted and which settings I picked to get there. So brakes and alignment are on default. In the gears, I have changed only gear 5 and 6 slightly to max out the long straights. That's it. Next, the differentials. Here I basically locked them all a bit higher than default. This ensures that one wheel transmits power even if the other wheel is in the air, which happens quite often on these bumpy roads. That's the easy part done. Here I gotta admit that Kenya gave me a proper challenge until I found a setup which satisfied me. Found myself fighting with 2 desires. First, keep the car healthy, and second, absorb all the bumps nicely. But every try of a properly resistant suspension made the car extremely nervous. Every try of a properly absorbing suspension made the car collect damage. In the case of the Impreza, mostly by digging its front bumper into the dirt on some bump, therefore damaging the radiator and other parts. So I thought, what do I actually want? A soft suspension absorbing bumps, but also keep the snout high in all conditions, which means keeping the snout up under braking, which led to the conclusion you see here. A strong difference between front and rear axle, which is very unusual on most rallies. The ride height is obviously maxed. All anti-roll bars are zeroed, because I want the bumps to be absorbed. This leads to body roll like you are on a sailing boat, but I am fine with that on these roads. And the front springs are set double as stiff compared to the rear springs. This ensures that under normal braking, the snout will never fully come down, yet it can keep the rear connected to the bumpy surface to always have traction. The car now takes a somewhat leaning back posture when driving. Once you do something like this, keep in mind to think about it in all other settings, especially in the dampers. Here you see quite the difference between front and rear. The front now has double the energy capacity. Same height, same ride height, with 100% stiffer springs. That takes double the energy to compress. Therefore, the front dampers are very loose, open quickly, and even move back relatively quickly to keep that nose up. In the rear, all dampers are slower, but also in a wider range. Compare fast bump versus the rebound setting. This ensures they do not compress much faster than the front, which would make jump landings very scary. Yet the very slow rebound in the rear ensures that they don't bounce the car upwards either, but rather they assist the front in keeping the snout up by keeping the ass low. I urge you to be careful with such setups. They are often more unstable than a symmetric version. But here in Kenya, after many experiments, this was the most controllable for the Impreza. Actually, very controllable. Despite arguably having faster cars in the class, I managed to get a global top 20 leaderboard time with this. And as of today, this is globally the fastest 98 Impreza time. In a sense, a world record. But knowing this is the internet, someone surely beat me by the time you are watching this. But I am still happy with the result. I certainly learned now to keep the asymmetric suspension option in my head when setting up other cars for the Safari. Let's now get into the driving challenges. As you see from the footage, and probably know from experience, Kenya is nothing like any other rally in the game. How to deal with all the roughness and potholes we already covered with the setup. Now you should be able to just drive across it all. Though be aware, there are still faster and slower ways across some of the bumps. If you can avoid big bumps by driving a slightly longer line, do that. It will reward you with less loss in speed. It can also be beneficial to use the grass next to the road, as here in Kenya there's not much of a grip difference if you're on the road or next to the road. As long as there's nothing in the way, you basically move the same. For steering wheel users, it is crucial to have very good force feedback settings here. If they are set up correctly, you feel every ditch and rock your wheels go over. Because the sand, the fesh here, is very soft and has little resistance to the wheels. That will pronounce all rough spots and help you to avoid driving across those especially rough bits. Another big challenge here is to keep track of the road. You often drive through areas that look the same but throw very different corners at you, like driving through high bushes and suddenly facing a square right instead of usual 3s and 4s. Same thing happens out on the open savanna plains, with little to no visual references. If you don't pay enough attention to your co-pilot here, Kenya will punish you with overshooting turns or hitting parked cars. The last point I'd like to cover is strategy. Kenya tears down your car, Any accident you have will multiply the longer you drive with the damage. Your suspension will naturally degrade just by driving on the rough road. This is therefore the place to rally with a very strategic mindset, especially if you drive against humans in clubs. Accumulated damage can make you retire, or even make you want to retire because the car cannot turn anymore. So keep it extra careful. Be even more careful once you have had an accident. The top priority must be to finish the event. This alone can yield a midfield result in the standings. I know I quoted it many times, but still, to finish first, you first must finish. This covers the most difficult and roughest location on gravel. Hope this gives you some guidance to make the time in the fesh easier for you. Up next, we will go after the roughest, most difficult tarmac rally. So we will see again on the island of Corsica. Until next time, tranquil madness.